Hello everybody, my name is Shortline614 and welcome back to episode 12 of Shortline's Runners and Comment, and today we will be covering CPKC and potentially the last CPKC video for a long while, because today, or tomorrow depending on when this video comes out, the morning of March 15th, 2023, the Surface Transportation Board approved the combination of the Canadian Pacific Railway with the Kansas City Southern Railway, and the new Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway will become real in about a month's time. Now, let's first examine the Surface Transportation Board's reasoning for approving the merger. And the first is that the new CPKC will be the first railroad linking all three North American countries of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This will allow direct single-line service that will be of great benefit to grain, intermodal, and automotive traffic flowing between the three countries. Second is that the merger will result in the growth of rail traffic by taking up to 64,000 trucks off the highway annually. The merger is also expected to create 800 new union jobs in the United States. These two factors are expected to improve safety in the environment. The third is that the merger will result in the growth of the passenger rail network due to a settlement CP and KCS came into with Amtrak. Amtrak's plans for expanded service over the new railroad will be put into effect. The fourth is that the merger is end-to-end with no overlap in lines. No competition will be lost and in fact be expanded. The merger will result in decreased transit times and increased investment. No routes or rail facilities will be closed or abandoned. Now, despite being end-to-end, the merger does still have competitive concerns. These concerns will be addressed by having the CPKC keep open all gateways at commercially reasonable terms. CPKC will have to justify in writing any rate increases upon customer request, and the CPKC will have to enter arbitration over any rate disputes that arise. Now, the board also did deny the requests of the other Class 1s for concessions. In the board's view, these requests were aimed at protecting existing traffic flows and hurting the ability of the new CPKC to compete. Now, interestingly enough, the board wasn't unanimous in their decision. Only 4 out of 5 board members approved the merger. Board member Robert Primus voted against the merger. He says he thinks the merger is too good to be true, and believes that the CPKC will result in a continued consolidation of Class 1 market power, and that the new CPKC will find loopholes in regulations and the conditions to abuse it. Now, the STB also said that they will implement the findings of the final environmental impact statement. Now, the board also found concerns that over the merger stemming from NS's disaster derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, were unfounded, due to CP being the safest railroad in North America for 17 years straight. There were a lot of politicians, or some politicians, who called for the merger to either be denied or the decision to be delayed in the aftermath of that derailment. The STB clearly does not think that NS's incompetence should affect this merger. Now, CPKC themselves said that the merger is projected to generate about $170 million in savings and about $820 million in new traffic growth over the next few years. We will see if that comes into fruition. It might be, it might not. I think it's a bit too early to tell. And last but not least, the merger will take effect on April 14th, so you have about a month before KCS becomes a fallen flag. Also kind of CP as well. Now, there were some conditions attached to the merger, and I will now read them off. So the first is that CPKC commits to keep open gateways on commercially reasonable terms and create no new bottlenecks. The second is that CPKC will shift its crew change location near Ottawa, Iowa, to a point further south and west on the CP Laredo subdivision. Third is that CPKC is committed to providing a dispute resolution process to address certain possible commuter rail disruptions in Chicago. The fourth is having CPKC honor the promises it made during the hearings, including but not limited to honor CP's commitments made under the settlement agreement with Amtrak, including CP's agreement to support certain planned expansions of Amtrak passenger service, not initiate the termination of reciprocal switching access for any shipper facility directly served by CP or KCS, cooperate with Union Pacific and BNSF to ensure adequate capacity along the Texas Gulf Coast route. This may involve the creation of a Houston bypass. Unless otherwise agreed to by CPKC and Metra, not implement an ordinary course operating plan directing CPKC through freight trains operating between Kansas City, Missouri, and St. Paul, Minnesota over certain Metra lines, except in emergency or non-routine situations. The fifth condition is an oversight of 7 years to monitor and address as necessary any various issues raised by commenters, including rate manipulation or other post-transaction conduct for transporter traffic moving through the gateway at Laredo, Texas, operational complexities in the Texas Gulf Coast area that necessitate coordination among parties to ensure adequate capacity and to maintain fluidity on shared lines, concerns regarding the volume of traffic moving through the Polo Joint Line facility between Airline Junction, Missouri and Polo, Missouri. CPKC will share this line with Union Pacific. Possible impacts on the St. Paul, Minnesota, particularly at Hoffman Avenue. Possible impacts on cross-border traffic flows over the Laredo Bridge. And possible delays and service disruptions impacting Chicago area lines and commuter rail service provided by Metro. The sixth condition is in connection with the oversight conditions, a condition requiring the applicants to report numerous service, operational, competition-related, and other metrics at prescribed frequencies. Seventh is a condition requiring the applicants to adhere to the terms of the CPKC service promise to address any post-transaction service disruptions. The eighth is a labor condition. They have to implement the labor conditions provided in the New York Dock Railway Agreement and honor the obligations established in the revised standards for the preemption of collective bargaining agreements for transactions according to the Interstate Commerce Act. These are both standard labor conditions that are pretty much applied to any merger. The ninth is a condition requiring the applicants to abide by the terms of the settlement agreement that CP entered into with the Iowa Interstate Railroad. CPKC and IAIS entered into agreement to keep open the gateway between them on reasonable terms. Now, the board also denied the requests of other Class 1 railroads, including Canadian National, CSX Transportation, Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, and BNSF. Quote, "It is not surprising that the other Class 1s seek conditions and other remedies that appear aimed at protecting their own traffic from competition with CPKC and at limiting the ability of the combined CPKC to meet its potential." Now, all of these conditions are either conditions that CPKC agreed to during the course of the hearings, minor conditions that won't have much impact on the new railroad, or standard conditions applied to every merger. This is about as close to a no-strings-attached approval as you can get. Now, I did make a prediction about what the decision would be. Of course, I did think it would be approved, and now that's now happened. I did make that prediction in a previous video, and I am happy to say that I was mostly correct about that. The biggest thing I was actually wrong about was the STB denying CN's request for trackage rights over the Springfield line / Gateway Western. Because Canadian National was so bullish on that, part of me just kind of expected, hey, maybe the STB will just say, yeah, here's your trackage rights for, here's your trackage rights, and just kind of have them walk away with that. But turns out, no. The only railroad that will be operating over that line will be CPKC. Now, the STB did order CPKC to work with UP and BNSF over Houston, which might result in the Houston bypass becoming a thing. I think we'll have to see in the future, should it become necessary. So, those are all of the conditions. So, what are my, at least for now, final thoughts? Well, I kind of want to talk about this within kind of the larger context of railroading in the last few decades, and specifically kind of the rivalry between Canadian National and Canadian Pacific. And well, ever since the mid-1990s, Canadian Pacific is basically, they've played second fiddle to Canadian National, especially in terms of their route structure. CN had a very focused vision for their network, and CP basically didn't. While CN spent most of the 2000s massively expanding their network in both the United States and Canada, CP just kind of sat back. They did acquire the Dakota, Minnesota, and Eastern / Iowa, Chicago, and Eastern system in 2008. However, those lines were lines that CP had sold off years before, and it was a simple reacquisition. Now, of course, in 2015-2016, you had the attempt by CP and Hunter Harrison to acquire first NS and then CSX, both of which fell flat on their faces. One anecdote that I actually find very funny is that Hunter Harrison refused to even consider KCS as a merger partner. I think he called KCS a dog with fleas, mostly because of its small size and the fact that it had a concession to operate in Mexico rather than owning that track outright. I find it interesting because now you have Keith Creel, the current CP CEO, and Hunter Harrison's right-hand man performing basically the merger that his former teacher would never even consider. And in fact, Creel has said on occasion that CPKCS was the only doable merger right now, which I find that very interesting. And while Creel has been CEO, CP has begun to expand again. They're basically trying to close that route structure gap that they have with CN. There are many places where CN goes that CP doesn't, and they're trying to trying to solve this issue in order to become a better competitor. And they started out in 2018 with a relatively small acquisition, which was a bunch of haulage rights over a pair of Genesee and Wyoming-owned short lines between Chicago, Illinois, and Jeffersonville, Indiana for intermodal traffic. They want to tap into the intermodal traffic between the Ohio River Valley and Asia through the port of Vancouver, British Columbia. Of course, the first, I guess, big acquisition that they did was they bought the Central Maine of Quebec in 2020. And this was a reacquisition. However, it hadn't been a part of CP since the mid-1980s, or mid-1990s, sorry, and hadn't been relevant for years before that. And this reacquisition gave CP a big boost by giving them access to the growing port of St. John through the Irving roads. And this has allowed them to wrestle many high-value contracts away from CN, and I've talked about the reason for this in other videos. Another acquisition that kind of flew under the radar was CP's purchase of the Detroit River Tunnel, which was previously, I think it was owned by an investment fund, and this gives them better control over their Chicago to Detroit corridor, where they primarily use trackage rights over Norfolk Southern. Now, the tunnel can only handle single stacks, however, I would not be surprised if they double stack it in the future. When Canadian National was privatized, one of the first things they did was heighten the tunnel through Sarina to double stack so they could, accommodate cross-border traffic. And that proved very well for them, and I think CP could do the same. CPKC could do the same with their tunnel. And now CP is KCS, which I frankly don't have to get much into, but it gets them access to the Gulf Coast, chemical plants in Texas and Louisiana, and of course Mexico. And of course Mexico is one of the few bright spots in terms of traffic growth in North America right now. I think it's only going to continue due to the trend of nearshoring. During and after COVID, you've seen this big push, this big trend of taking manufacturing from Asia and bringing it to places like Mexico, and even a bit back to the United States to kind of shorten supply chains so that they become more reliable. And I think that CPKC is in a perfect position to take advantage with that with their single line service. And of course, you also have the port of Durazno Cardenas in southern Mexico, which, if they play their cards right, could become a significant port rivaling the other ports on the West Coast. And I think just an interesting statistic to kind of heighten this all is that CPKC is now they've exceeded CN in terms of both geographic scope and route mileage. CPKC will be 19,200 miles, while CN is only 1,800, 600 miles. Sorry about that. And one thing I have to point out is that while CP may be bigger, though, CN does have a better routes. The Illinois Central is always going to be a better Kansas City to Gulf Coast route than the combination of Kansas City Southern and the Milwaukee Road, just due to the inherent nature of how and where those railroads were built. Now, that is something that CPKC is going to have to overcome. There's also the fact that CPKC relies a lot more on trackage rights than CN. CN doesn't really rely on a whole lot of trackage rights. In fact, during the 2000s, they made a point to kind of acquire those gaps in their network so they didn't have to rely on. And, well, that may just be an opening for CPKC further expansion in the future. Maybe one day they'll get their own Chicago to Detroit line. Now, of course, what does this all mean for the future? How will CN react? Will CP continue to make acquisitions? Will CPKC be a successful merger? Because remember, a lot of mergers aren't that successful. Just because, their two companies merged does not mean all the promises are fulfilled. However, I think that with a very competent management team, CP is the best on railroad in the country right now, which I know isn't really saying much, but it's true. I think that they'll be able to pull it off. But let's see if I'm right. I've been wrong about a whole bunch of stuff before. I do wish the new railroad the best of luck, though, and I finish off this video by effectively declaring CP the winner of the last 5 years. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. I don't know when that will be out, but it will. Goodbye, everybody.